We're back with Clif High. I hope you enjoyed the first segment. I'm enthralled as always. But we had started talking about the high-tech future, which was a huge part of the Alta report and all the work you've done with the WebOps. Something got kind of hiccuped in my brain. I mean, that's the way I see it. Over the last 2018, it seemed all different things kind of got stalled or delayed. And
Yeah.
why don't you pick up from there and then take us into this high-tech future then?
Okay, the sci-fi world stuff. Yeah. So I would argue that absent the data pollution that I got from the cults there, which it kind of died off in 2017 anyway, because the cults ran into their own difficulty. Mm-hmm. You know, they were fired from Gaia or left or however it ended, and so they were no longer polluting, but the damage had been done. But my argument is that absent the pollution there, my system was accurate to the point of predicting where we're actually at now, because it predicted the strange energies from space way back in 2006, 2005 and 6 that would be affecting us from 2009 onwards, that we didn't know what would manifest, but now we know it's making everybody just irascible.
I am like that these days.
Yeah.
I'll vouch for that.
And I know I'm being affected by the strange energies from space, and so I sort of harmonize with it to strike even harder and be even fiercer, right? Because it gets it out of my system, it grounds me out. So it's kind of good that I'm fighting the cults, mm-hmm. because otherwise I'd be frustrated and pounding trees.
And not knowing what was going on.
Correct. So anyway, so we've had a good general description in the Alta reports of the period of time that we're in now. And what really screwed us up was the timing was always a bitch. You'd no sooner tune and get the timing right, and something else would go wonky, and then you'd have to redo it all and so on. But we're in this period now where there is a combinoric effect from the software. So software ate our infrastructure, and it's in every single traffic light, and it's in all different kinds of stuff now. It's in my dishwasher, it's in my washer, and we're going to get it into the refrigerators and all of these kind of things, and all part of our systems and our social order and so on. So software has basically eaten the world. In the process of doing so, software entered into all manner of things, research, in all areas of science in a really serious way, and displaced a lot of bad science in the process. But then we've gotten other forms of bad science as a result of software, garbage in, garbage out. But anyway, though, so now we're at this point where there's actually a group of people, I think they were Chinese, but it doesn't really matter, that did a variant on the system I wrote, and they ran that natural language processing software, which was very similar to what I had done, and they ran it against existing research papers in the material sciences. And they used that software to make combinations and selections that have created new materials out of old research. And so we've got, and now, so the temporal marker. Okay, so the big temporal marker I was looking for was that had been forecast since 2008 or so is here now. And it's actually effectively emerged yesterday, but I knew that they were going to do it sometime back, like 6 weeks or so ago, maybe. In the last 6 weeks, I knew it was going to happen. And what it is the publication of a magazine. Now, it's not the magazine per se that was forecast. It's the subject matter and how the subject matter is being treated that was forecast way back when, as a temporal marker. And that is the actual doorway. It's the opening of the door as we enter into sci-fi world, was this particular...
So this was this week?
Yesterday. So
nice timing.
Exactly. So on the 16th of July, they brought out this magazine called Matter, like material. And matter is all about engineering new matter. Mm-hmm. Okay, making new materials, making all the stuff that'll go into my anti-gravity RV that I want.
Right.
By that I don't mean remote viewing, I mean recreational vehicle.
Oh, we did talk about that too, but yes.
Anyway, so look at all the old Alta reports that were always talking about new materials that would be coming on out.
Absolutely.
And all the stuff that was going to happen as a result of the new materials. This new material forming with that new material with this process creates the floaty, remote or recreational vehicle kind of stuff, right? And the magazine came out, and the language within the magazine matches the original Alta report from 2000. It was late 2008, I believe. And in that 2008 report too was the first hints of the Bitcoin, of the shaping up for Bitcoin was in that data set. So this was a huge data set that was very prescient. There were a lot of things in some of those long-term data sets that didn't roll out, and all of a sudden they're here.
Right.
And so my timing was off, but the structure of the forecast was correct. So Matter the magazine is out now. Matter the magazine is focused on the combination of software, material science, and material science research all joining together, and to produce basically an industry that will be devoted to cranking out new and cool stuff.
Sci-fi material for the
Sci-fi
sci-fi
material, right?
Wow.
Right. Super
Including
lightweight.
silver, all these silver things you were talking about,
Right.
the unique properties that were about to come out about silver.
And here's the thing: in that first magazine issue, they're discussing things like new matter that they've got based around aerogel. Aerogel's been around since the early space explorations in the 60s and the 70s, right?
What is aerogel?
Aerogel is a substance that's like 98% air and 2% of these chemicals, and it's kind of it's a gel. It's sort of like a styrofoam, only you can crush it with your hands and this kind of stuff. Extremely lightweight, can be very strong, but it's a super insulator. Absolutely amazing insulator. But it's no good in clothing or anything because you could crush it, right? Because it's 98% air. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, so now though, in the magazine, there's new processes where they're making aerogel polar bear hairs. Okay, polar bears and dogs are really interesting. Polar bears have transparent hairs that are intermixed within it, and polar bears would be brown when these transparent hairs fall out. Okay, so they're really a brown bear. But a polar bear has these transparent hairs that give them that silver sheen, reflects light. It's a huge insulator, does all of these different kinds of things, and it makes vitamin C for them. Okay, dogs have the same hair structure without the transparency. Also makes vitamin C for them. Anyway, the vitamin C part aside, what these scientists have done is they've used software to come up with a mechanism for taking aerogel and making it into an encapsulated hair-like structure that could be used in lieu of fiber fill or any number of things for insulation and this sort of deal. And it can have other properties because it has a certain amount of stiffness. They could actually attach sensors to the mass and do things with sensing and so on it. But the super insulation component of it is truly amazing because the little hairs can be, as I understand it from the article, they can be bent down or they could stand up. And you could make the little hairs stand up and be only a half an inch high. And it would have of these aerogel. And the half an inch high, densely packed, or completely packed, is going to have the insulating value of on the order of 16 inches of fiberglass insulation. So you could have a clothing that would literally be hardly any thicker than what I'm wearing now, a half an inch thick maybe, and you could walk into the Arctic and the wind would blow you off your feet, but you wouldn't freeze, right?
But the applications of that type of
everything,
from housing to
and they're also talking about the manufacture of the way in which the hairs would be made can also be used to manufacture materials that will go into the human body and make them compatible with the human body in the sense of artificial heart valves, right? They now know how to make structures that can be compatible with our bodies.
This gets to me maybe to a potential other hit. You had talked about a while back about it would be in our body, like we talk on the cell phone by hitting our shoulder or something to that effect.
Right.
As one of the things in the sci-fi world, and now we're kind of starting to see
it, right?
How this?
And we're also seeing, of course, the just the other day, also the same day as the magazine, there was a air show, I think, in Paris, and where they sell airplanes and avionics, and there was a demonstration there of a device that was like a hoverboard, and a guy flew around on this hoverboard device, and I don't know what the duration of the fuel is, but it's not a jet engine, and the fuel is used to drive an engine that is so powerful that it can lift a man on compressed air. So it's actually compressing air, taking air in and compressing it, shoving it out hard enough in a little tiny thing that you can stand on and fly around on. And he flew around 6 or 7 minutes in the little vid I saw. And it was absolutely amazing.
So your flying cars and flying RVs are on the way.
Right. Without having to go to the old propellers, quad rotors and that kind of stuff.
Although I've seen some of those, because I think some of the flying cars that I've seen are kind of takeoffs on drones.
Exactly, in Dubai.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems a little inefficient with all the propellers and all that, compared to something like a hoverboard or anti-gravity type of thing.
Well, if we get anti-gravity, then these will go away.
Well, I know, exactly.
Yeah. But I've actually talked to a guy who rode one of the quadcopter things in Dubai, and he went from the airport to his hotel. And he said he was...
As it like a taxi type of thing?
As a taxi type of thing, and it was all, there's no human involved. You just have this ticket punched out as to where you want to go, and you insert it in there, and it programs the software. It's sort of like the old punch card kind of an approach. And he said it scared the absolute hell out of him, because it's flying very high up.
Why did he do it?
Just because he could,
Yeah.
And he didn't want to be afraid of new technology. The reason that we were corresponding was that I'd been telling him about I'm adopting all things new, right? Mm-hmm. Because the world in which I grew up, the all-weather fabric everything was made out of cotton. Mm-hmm. But cotton has many disadvantages, right? And these days you've got the synthetics and so on, and so basically I'm just bringing myself up to date, trying to stay current, which is difficult as an old guy because you tend to get set in your ways and you don't like the new things and so on. Yeah. And he and I were talking about fear of technology and these sorts of things. So when he went to Dubai for business, he's in the phone business. And this was all about that Huawei business, the 5G things. Anyway, though, he said, yeah, he did it. And he said, he said a bunch of rude words about what was happening to his bowels as he was going. Yeah. But he said it was something. And he said the landing, he said he was never so happy to get out of a pod in his life.
I bet. I mean, that would freak me out.
Yeah.
Anyway, just a comment that another point of fact, Clif actually showed up with some new type of socks that he gave me just today that have interwoven silver, silver guys, and other properties. So he's not only saying it, he's living it and doing it.
And people are sending, the reason I have those is because people are sending me these that are in the materials business saying, hey, by the way, look at this new cloth. And so they're sending me just, random bits of cloth to play with and try and stuff.
See, that gets us back to the Roswell crash. When they announced that, and they had it looked like aluminum foil that would reconstitute itself after you crumple it all up.
Yeah.
How much of not to jump subjects too fast, how much has been hidden from humanity over the last 100 years is it a completely different world already? The type, what is it, the type 1 civilization?
Yeah, but so those kind of things are bogus. I don't really like the scale, right. Because it's based on energy usage and people apply it to other things. And we actually passed a type 1 civilization when we had oil deliveries to all the nations on the planet, fundamentally, because we were doing things at a global level. But we're really in an interesting situation. As a woo-woo guy, it's part of my understanding, and I don't say belief because I'm quite willing to change on the base of evidence, right? That if you found evidence to the contrary, I would certainly accept that evidence. But it's my understanding that such things as fiber optics, magnetic control systems, the digital chips that allow all of our computers, liquid crystal displays, all of these things are reverse engineered from these craft. Now, I'm willing to accept that the military does not put an alien origin on these craft. They're not saying that they're necessarily alien. They don't know what the hell they are, and they're like the rest of us. But if we just eliminate where they came from and all of that, it does appear that there's a core of solid fact that something happened. It happened in 1947. Coincident with that happening in 1947, there was a flurry of flying saucers and UFO reports that went from 47 all the way up through 52 with a real intense level. And so that was coincident with some odd things. The invention of digital chips, integrated circuits, fiber optics, all of these things that also reputedly were extracted from these craft, ancient or otherwise. So we could say that they're circumstantial that they came from there. But now we're actually at the point where we may have gotten a leg up with this technology, but now we're at this combinoric level where we're able to work the technology to the point where we can take that technology, feed it back into its own loop with our own twist on it as humans, and get other newer technology from it. And I also would point out something, and that is that prior to 1947, all of humanity was on a particular technological path. That technological path was typified, exemplified by vacuum tubes. Mm-hmm. In 1944, if you go and look at popular mechanics or these kind of things, the height of dreaming for a job would be to be a vacuum tube engineer. Mm-hmm. Because we knew that we'd get better and better, newer vacuum tubes, some with radioactivity material, all different kinds of stuff out of them. 47 happens and vacuum tubes die. There's only like 2 vacuum tube manufacturers in the United States, and they're basically single-man operation kind of things that are inventing new vacuum tubes.
Were those mainly used in computers of the day, or was it other
TVs, all different kinds of anything that we would think of as an electronic device had at its core radios, even vacuum tubes, right? If you got precision control, you had vacuum tubes, mm-hmm. and they perform many of the functions of the much cheaper, simpler digital electronic gateways. Okay, so basically they were just there to discriminate on electrical pathways the way the integrated circuits do in computer chips, for instance. So we replaced one technology with another, primarily because it's a hell of a lot cheaper to do that, to produce digital circuits en masse, grow them in a tube and slice them to make your chips, than it is to physically form the vacuum tubes and put them all together. But vacuum tube technology, we may end up going back to because it offers us things that digital does not. Digital people fail to understand that there's many numbers that cannot be represented by ones and zeros. They think that all of the digits that we as humans, $16.23, right? That kind of thing. They think all the such numbers can be represented in digital format, and that's not true. There are some numbers that especially the real numbers, and even complex numbers, that we basically have to round up or down the digital in order to be able to manipulate it in the math, and we're missing something as a result of that. Whereas you don't have that problem necessarily if your vacuum tubes are set up that way. So there's a difference between digital and analog technology. And curiously, right at this moment, we have quantum computers. Quantum computers are 100% analog. Okay, they don't work with digital surfaces. Right. They don't have those kind of gateways. They're much more woo-woo because they create conditions and then freeze the conditions in order to get the extraction of the software from those conditions, the state of the chip, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And they're very much an analog process. But so we're in sci-fi world right now. And one of the ramifications of sci-fi world, which I now can go back and read some of the old reports and realize that it was trying, if I looked at the data a different way, I could have forecasted the Mandela effect, coincident with the rise of the quantum computers. And the Mandela effect is getting worse and worse and worse as we go along.
I have a new one, a new Mandela effect that I mean, it might just be the way my head works.
Yeah.
But, and I talked about this at the show I just had, the 1988 magazine with the Phoenix coming out of the burning cash. It says, get ready for a world currency. Not world government, world currency.
Yeah.
The medallion has that famous zero with the line through it that I've talked to you about quite a bit. To me, that represents something in the Grand Canyon.
Right.
Because I've got other material on that. But below it, it said, I'd always seen it as 2018.
Yeah.
I look at it now, and because I zoomed in on it to show the zero in my presentation, and when you zoom in on it, it looks like 2019. And I'm like, I was like Mandela, because it's the way the 8 is formed. It's it kind of looks like an S because they're trying to get the three-dimensional
Sure.
look. It kind of looks like an S, and then it's you can see that it's connected on the top, and the bottom's a lot darker. And so when you zoom in, it looks like a 9. You pull
Weird.
out, it looks like an 8. I mean, and I'm thinking, and I asked Amy, I'm like, what's the name of that thing? She's like, the Mandela effect. I go, oh
Yeah.
my God, it could be. I mean, in my latest Roto-Rooter stuff, because everybody's saying, when's the date? Give me a day that everything's gonna crash, or Deutsche Bank's derivatives will blow, and blah blah blah. I know the date in retrospect in 2008.
Right.
That date was on September 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning, and Senator Ken Jaworski came out and said he didn't say September 11th. He said on Thursday last week, which was September 11th, 550 billion went out of the monetary fund in a matter of half an hour. So I'm looking at him like, well, if I had to pick a date out of any other random date in the future for the same type of thing to happen, it would be September 11th again in 2019. Now, other things about this, in the Road to Ruta comics, that's what Ruta writes in the sand, 9/11, or 11 plus 9. So there's something. And then Christine Lagarde just announced her retirement.
Yep.
On what day?
Yep.
September 12th.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things. I'm not saying it's going to happen that people will see it.
Well, there's something occurring, though. I mean, just whether or not we actually see any manifestation of it, the manifestations that we have now, we should examine and ask ourselves, basically, what the hell, right? Why is there... Okay, so we know that humans exist with pareidolia, which is the hunting for... We constantly want to hunt for patterns.
Right.
Our brains are set up to look for patterns because it makes our life easier, right? If you notice the patterns of a chicken, then you can find the eggs easier, that sort of thing. But the pareidolia can run rampant, and we can create patterns that don't exist.
I do that all the time, I think.
Okay, and that actually is a sign of a creative mind. All right, constantly seeking for new patterns and so on, and it's also a sign of flexible intelligence. But there's an aspect of this that, with the Mandela effect and what you're discussing here, that I think is actually a manifestation in reality, whether we understand what it means or not.
Right.
And some of the people, the cults, for instance, they take advantage of this. So the people asking you what day is it going to crash on and all of this. That's an aspect of their pareidolia. They want something to hang a temporal marker on within their own minds. And it'll never happen that way.
Well, Snippy's psychics are doing that a lot with his current channel. They're coming, well, here's the day and here's the price, and Joe and all his followers are like, oh, well, this is going to be the price on this day. Although it keeps changing.
Sure, that's the thing. It always keeps moving with the cults. Okay, this is one of David Wilcock and Corey Goode's methodologies. They put a hard line in the sand, and then they rub it out, move it over here as time goes by. Oh, well, we were wrong. We got to move it over here, and so on. And it never ever gets there. But as long as they keep you outside of your temporal boundary, then they hook you with this anticipation, and you will suspend disbelief until that day. Basically, that's what you're doing. You're waiting to see if this thing happens on that day, and the problem is you'll never diss them. You'll never think that they're full of shit, because they'll move that day on you. And so you never have a chance to actually...
And usually it's a little before the day actually comes, so they aren't actually proven wrong.
Sure, exactly. They're never proven wrong. And so that's one of their methods for using this. But they're taking advantage of this inbuilt thing within human mind, okay? But because that exists in there, we have in our minds curiosities, in my way of thinking. These curiosities include a fixation on certain numerals. And the seemingly deliberate, I want to say, advisedly, use that word deliberate act of universe to provide those numbers. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's no real reason that, anything need happen on September 11th. But we have September 11th in the Big Lebowski, signing the check. Years ahead of any kind of event. And connected
Simpsons,
with all of these things.
Yeah.
And it's all connected with other supporting context. So in the Big Lebowski, for instance, as he's writing the check, and it was for, I can't remember the amount of money, but that was significant because it was such a small amount of money. There's George H. Bush talking about the New World Order as he's, and how this can't stand and everything, as he's writing that check. So there's all these supporting contexts around the numbers being presented to us within human-derived formats, okay? So like the movies. So you can say, okay, well, there's a conspiracy there. Someone's putting that into the movie in order to get us to think about that day a particular way, associate it with particular things. And you could...
Like subconsciously?
Correct.
Interesting.
The programming in your head,
Yeah.
so to speak, putting those connections in there because there's something about this. Human beings work on this way. Our minds work on a particular way. And that is that you need to tie things together in your brain. Those things have to exist in your brain before you can tie them together. As a songwriter, you will probably not think about this necessarily, but in order for someone to enjoy a song, they have to have heard it all the way through. Because part of our mind participates in the enjoyment of a song by anticipating that next note, that next chord, that next refrain. And so you become involved with it. There's an emotional attachment, not to the song, not to the note you're hearing, but to the next one that you know will appear that you're anticipating because you know that song and you're happy about knowing that song, basically, right? And so as a songwriter, there are certain things you can do to mirror popular other songs that already have those effects built into the brain without copying those songs. And it's not even near those songs, but it invokes those kind of things.
There's bands that will play the same 3 or 4 chords. They'll play like 30 song sets with the exact same chords, and they're all very famous popular songs. It's amazing.
Yeah, and they're doing it because people like it. Because it has an inbuilt emotional response within the audience hearing this, that brings up all these happy kinds of emotional responses, and thus the band gets those attached to them. And so they become relatively famous about all of this sort of thing. So anyway, so humans, because we work that way, we can be taken advantage of. So the cults do this, right? Oh, it'll be this day, and they don't face ever any kind of censure or downside for making these predictions. Now, I always resented that with the psychics and the cultists, because when I did it, I would put a hard date there and I never moved it. And it crapped out or it didn't.
Right. And you always said, you're not perfect, it's just a little better than chance.
Exactly. And it turned out to be quite better.
Quite better. Yes.
Quite better in some instances.
Yeah.
In some instances, right.
Blondes on boats.
Exactly. Oh, that was a good one.
That was my favorite.
Yeah. But a few of the predictions were really spot on, and there's no way it could have been done as any kind of a hoax or anything like that. It's not any of these mentalist tricks of backfilling and so on. But the predictive programming aspect of our human brain, the deep state knows this. All of these individuals know this. Cultists know this, and authors, speakers, orators know this. And if you were in a habit of reading old books in Latin about the Roman Empire, you would see that the orators knew this, and so they would, and the storytellers. And when I write a story, for instance, whatever I begin that story with, like a good movie, that's how I'm going to end that story. I'm going to tie it all the way back and bring you in a complete circle, because you feel complete as a reader of that story.
Once upon a time,
and then
live happily ever after.
Or it was the best of times, worst of times, and then at the very end of Tale of Two Cities, you're back to it's the worst of times and the best of times again, and the connection all the way around. And so we're prone to manipulation. Go ahead.
Let me ask you a specific question on my work from that goddamn comic book from the Federal Reserve, where Ruda literally writes in the sand. The only thing changed from the comic book was originally made in 1981.
Right.
Wrote in the sand was an economic formula called On the Road to the Golden Age. I've done all the homework on that. 2007, exact same comic book, updated cartoon. The formula's gone, and Ruda writes in the sand 11 plus 9. And this is January 1st of 2007. From the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Why? What is it? Was it trying to program us? Was it someone being clever, knowing a year and a half before the 2008 September 11th literal, that was the day that all that money was sucked out? So it had to be, to me, putting all that together, it had to be known and planned prior to the putting it in the comic book in January of 2007.
Okay, and we will never know. Okay, well,
I'm
okay,
still
right,
still digging on that.
What we do know is that this is how you make people think things are true. Okay, so truth is an emotion where in our minds we want to separate the potential that it could be fantasy from the potential that it's actually, whatever it is we're observing, is actually manifest. Some of the things that allow us to make a decision on whether or not something is true is preloading in the brain. So if we've got images and connections in the brain that we can form, we're going to get a neural pathway response as these images are joined through the neurons that will build up a certain amount of energy that will shade us over towards an emotion that this seems more real and more true. Okay, as somebody who's taken lots of psychedelics, you have a different way of thinking about your perceptions after you've done a lot of psychedelics, because you realize that the hallucinations are not true. They're being manufactured through your perceptions. Mm-hmm. But hallucinations are independent of journeying or anything other than or anything else within psychedelics, but it alerts you to how your brain can be manipulated. And so for a long time I was uncertain as to whether the Mandela effect was actually a real effect. I knew it was a real effect in the sense that people were misremembering, okay? But you have to ask yourself, okay, why is there a mass misremembering at this time?
Right.
Okay, it could be any number of things. It could be strange energies from space, which we know are in existence. We're impacted by them in 2003. They tore off a big chunk of our atmosphere. Bondachi quake killed 300,000 people exactly. And so we know that there's strange energies from space. Are they the cause? I don't know. It doesn't feel like, sort of true. But for whatever reason, there is an association, and I think that's a good association, between the Mandela effect and quantum computers. And so are the quantum computers the cause of the Mandela effect? It feels as though it's true. Okay, it doesn't mean that it's factual.
How, not a long explanation, but
no.
How could that be?
Okay, so here's how it could be. And one of the reasons that I think that this is the case is because there's a physical correlation between where these computers are set up and the spread of the Mandela effect in the communities around those areas. Okay, so the first areas that had the quantum computers set up from D-Wave, and it's not just D-Wave that causes its effect, but they were the most prolific builders of these. They were set up for NASA. And we had this weird thing about all of the Bible Belt in Texas, this is where the computers were, started getting involved with this debate as to whether it was lamb lying down with the wolf or lamb lying down with a lion, okay, within the Bible. And so it turns out it's lamb lying down with a wolf, but everybody remembers it as being lamb lying down with a lion.
Well, Texas was where the Kennedy limousine, have you seen that one?
Yeah, exactly.
Like how many seats were in that damn limousine?
Right.
And I remember it as 2, and there's all these pictures now of 3.
Right. And right, so there's other,
that's right in there. Yeah.
Okay, but there's other Mandela, but the one I'm concentrating on is the specific subset of the population that was first impacted. Okay, because the Kennedy assassination stuff was a little bit later. The very first impact of the Mandela effect out of Texas was on the religions. All right, and then the other place that they moved the computers is down in Southern California, and we see a lot of the Mandela effect in the movies. I'm not your father, or I was your father in
all
Star
Wars.
Star Wars, right? And then, but prior to that, there was also another manufacturer that put a bunch of computers up in the Northeast around music areas. Okay, where in New York and so on, where all of the centers of all of the music, and then there was all this Mandela effect stuff about about this language and so on, right? And so now we've recently had quantum computers moved into a couple of new areas, and we've got new Mandela effect stuff spreading throughout the food distribution business. Was it Kraft stovetop stuffing, or was it Stouffer's stovetop stuffing?
Oh my God.
Exactly. Now it's Kraft, but before it was Stouffer's. And the publishing industry was the first.
And they did. It wasn't
bought out or anything like. No. And the design of the packages. If you go and look it up, you'll see that there's now a Mandela effect around the stovetops stuffing, right? Prior to that, we had the Berenstein versus the Berenstain Bears, the publishing industry because of the computers in Boston and New York. And so
what was the original? It was Nelson Mandela's death, wasn't it?
Correct.
Like that?
Correct. That's why it's named after Mandela. Okay, because everybody remembered him dying in the 80s, but he actually died in 2013. Mm-hmm. Or that's what we buried him in 2013. because there are a lot of people claim that he died and was put on ice. So at this point, we're now in a world where we're in the information age, which curiously means that everything is available to us and we can't accept any information whatsoever because it could all be bogus. Mm-hmm. And we have people running around doing debunking and all of these sorts of things, like Joe from the Carolinas. Mm-hmm. He wants to know, so he wants to separate out all of the foolishness. Problem is, foolishness is piling up way too high. We can't shovel that fast, right? Anyway, though, so the Mandela effect, though, is a curiosity, and the reason that it exists, in my opinion, associated with the quantum computers, is because quantum computers are analog devices. All right, they don't have a digital chip at their core. They actually have a digital computer wrapped around an analog device in order to have an interface into the analog device. That analog device, the actual quantum computer itself, is this can. And in that can is a motherboard that's held suspended, and then it has some connections that come on out to the digital world. And those connections are usually done through tubes and compressed air, basically, or some other kind of an effect. And the reason that they exist is because you can't, as an operator of a quantum computer, hit enter when you're ready to run your program. Because if you know that the computer is going to start that program at that point, your consciousness causes that quantum computer it affects it because you know it's starting right then. So what they do is they have a mechanism whereby you hit enter, and it can start now, it can start in a minute, it can start in 5 minutes, you just will never know. And so they had to do that because they had to isolate the guts of the quantum computer from our existing reality. And this is where the Mandela effect comes in. So you'll pardon me for a second here, but
no worries. This is fascinating stuff. And
okay, so let's imagine that this is the quantum computer, and you've got your regular digital computer all around it, and we type in our software up here, and there's some level of translation between the digital computer to programming the initial state of the quantum computer. Now, digital computers take software, and they take each instruction and they execute it, and then they go into the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. This is why no digital computer will ever have sentience. It'll never become alive, never become self-aware, etc., right? Because it's a brute force machine. Quantum computers don't work that way. And what they end up doing is they set material inside the quantum computer into this known state of ambiguity. Mm-hmm. And then the software is sort of loaded in, the ambiguity is built up, and then they fire it off, and there's no more ambiguity, and they have their answer. Interesting thing about quantum computers, they only right 80% of the time. 20% of the time, the answers are bogus. But if you run the same test 3 times, the same software 3 times, the odds favor that if you get 2 out of 3 answers that are the same, you go with those 2 out of the 3, right? Okay, so here's how they work. They've got this thing sticking down into this can. The can is sealed up, 100% sealed up, and they pump all the air out of it. And then they take that can and they put it in this giant refrigerating device. And they make the giant refrigerating device take out all of the heat from all of the air around the can, all of the space around the can. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to remove all consciousness from the actual firing of that experience, of that experiment. And each and every one of the firing of a quantum computer is basically an experiment. Will it be in the 80% that's accurate or the 20% that's not? And they do this by a number of different means. Absolute refrigeration, the sucking out all molecules. And the reason they have to do that is they can't have a molecule in there vibrating at all or it'll affect it. So they got to get out every bit of air and everything. So basically what they're doing is this. They're taking all of the consciousness that's in our can here right now, and they're getting it out. It's got to go somewhere. So they're in essence building up consciousness around the quantum computer that's evacuated from that chamber. And in order for that evacuation, and the device itself is probably the size of a trash can. Okay, it's not that big. Usually it's made out of this brass-looking kind of material. But it's about that, a trash can size. So you wouldn't think excluding out all of the universal radiation of all kinds, right, all consciousness out of that can would affect stuff. But it does, because it creates a hole in reality where there's no consciousness. And consciousness doesn't like this. Consciousness pervades all of reality.
Right.
So we're building up a denser field around these cans. So imagine if this were water, and that we're out here swimming in this water and stuff, right? And we have a big can come into our water, and they pump out all the water that would have filled that can. Well, there's going to be a different amount of water. It's going to be denser for a brief period of time around the outside of the can as all that water is pumped out. And we, as the fishes swimming around it, would impact that level of density. We might not be even aware of it. It might be just so fine. But eventually, you pump out all of the consciousness, it's got to spread out and even out, because consciousness is a homogeneous substance. Okay, so now this is where it gets into the real woo, right? You and I are actually pinpoints of consciousness that exist. Our bodies don't exist. That's an illusion of our perception. We're consciousness points that are riding on a continual creation destruction wave of energy. We're created and destroyed 22 trillion times a second. And our consciousness remains from one creation destruction into the next, and so on. So consciousness is persistent. So to move consciousness out of a homogeneous environment and make it more dense around these cans of the quantum computers is what is causing, in my opinion, or what could be labeled as a cause for the Mandela effect. Especially since, if we look at the geography of the planet, every place where we put one of these quantum computers, a new form of Mandela effect springs up. First in Texas, it was the religious Mandela effects. Then it was actually Berenstain Bears were one of the first ones. Then the religious ones in Texas at NASA. Then we've got the entertainment ones. Now we've got over in Tennessee and some of these other areas, quantum computers being put in to do, of all things, truck routing. Complex truck routing for delivery, right? Very key for money. And so that's one of the first problems they're working on. And curiously, and they're using it for food distribution trucks. And where do we get these Mandela effects? The food distribution business. Okay, so now I've also got a friend of mine that works in avionics. He's about ready to retire. He's about 2 years from retirement. And this is why he knows that it's creeping into his business. Because in this, and I'm not going to go into any of the details, but they've had a recent plopping down of a D-Wave computer in his environment, and they're working on it for the development of new devices and stuff in the avionics industry. And he was saying, he said, we ran into a weird thing. He was telling me about this. He said, we ran into a weird thing. We're having a code review, and this guy's a senior fellow, and he's at like the head of the table, and the other people do most of the talking, and he makes the decision, right? And everybody presents their technical thing, but he said it was a weird code review because it didn't start off right. Because he said there was a guy saying, that code don't look right. It wasn't that way last month at this section when we looked at it. Really? And their code had changed. Okay, it still operates, but they're actually still in this stage able to go back to tape, digital high-speed tape storage backup system on a multi-processor mainframe that runs a parallel operating system that has been running continuously, running the program. And so they did a core dump. And so they basically took the program off, then in a hexabyte or hexadecimal format, converted it out of that back into the code, and sure enough, this guy was right. Because there was a debate in there. Some of the people remembered it the way he did, and everybody else said, no, it's always been this way.
Wow. So
there was a misremembering at that level. And so the guy I'm talking to, who's sitting at the head of the table, says, Mandela effect? Because this is the first time it happened in their industry, and so on. So maybe it actually is occurring because they've got one of those machines less than 20 miles away from them.
It kind of makes sense. I mean, to me, obviously it's way over my head, a lot of it, but it makes sense that consciousness, as it wasn't meant to be vacated out of that area.
Exactly.
So it'll be affected in other areas, probably pushing out like a wave.
And where's it got to go? And it wants to be ubiquitous, and now it can't get back into any of these cans. And so maybe when we finally get all of these quantum computers rolled out all around the planet and stuff, and they're never going to be in your laptop. It's not ever going to be that kind of a computer, right? So it'll never be at that level. But maybe when we've got more or less the industry saturated, maybe the Mandela effect will gradually just die away because consciousness becomes, homogeneous again around all of the cans and evens itself out. But who knows?
I mean, but so far the changes that we've observed have been not a big deal. What happens if it becomes a big deal?
Well, and there's the thing, we don't know. Okay, so we don't know what changes are impacted until we piece it together.
Right.
And so we may indeed have already crossed a threshold with the big deal for this effect, and we'll just see it in hindsight when some shit happens. So I'll give you an example here. We have two separate tracks in industry related to space. In one of the tracks we've got going, you'll read public statements about Jeff Bezos wants 3,600 satellites. They're going to do all kinds of shit. Elon Musk wants 5,000 satellites. They're going to do all kinds of shit. The Russians, they want to do, 1,700 satellites. They want to do their own new unique form of GPS system, which is really cool, by the way, on its own, because their form of GPS would give you altitude as well, or depth in the ocean. But there's another track that says we're going to be lucky if we get another permanent satellite up at any given moment. The reason is there's just too much space junk. And so this main track in part of the industry for space says at some point, we don't know when, but it may occur within the next year, could happen tomorrow, there's going to be a cataclysm in a sense that will bind humans to Earth for maybe thousands of years unless we come up with a technical solution. And here's the problem. There are so many thousands of satellites, and they're whipping around so fast, and there's all this orbital debris. And it's whipping around 30,000, 40,000 miles per hour. And it impacts each other, and they break apart, creating more orbital debris, also moving at 30, 40,000 miles per hour.
And they hit another one, and they hit another one.
And at some point, it'll just be such a mass of swirling debris that you try and shoot anything up through that debris, the odds are it's going to get smacked by some shit it's so small you can't even plot.
And that's all it would take.
And that's all it's going to take. And it's only going to take, not even a screw or something, but one little tiny thread from one of those screws that broke loose from that satellite, moving at 30,000 miles an hour, is going to go right through your satellite and bust it up into all these bazillions of pieces. And the Indian government, some months back, tried to get, or did an experiment that was 100% successful. Because their experiment was to send up a satellite killer. And they killed a satellite.
But now you got little pieces everywhere.
Now the estimate is there's 60 or 70,000 pieces of that satellite floating around in that orbit, so they made the problem that much worse.
There was a time, not too long ago, where the U.S. shot down a satellite and China shot down a satellite. My take was it's probably an EMP that the bad guys had that were going to, try to fire off. I don't know, but one was the size of a bus.
Right.
And you're blowing up a thing the size of the bus, knowing that little pieces and parts are going to stay there forever and has the ability to destroy.
To be bullets.
See, I don't see them intentionally doing that unless they had a way around it that we don't know.
Our governments are all compartmentalized, so they're going to be off on a trail doing stuff with no thought of consequences. Okay, because of the way our minds work and so on. These guys are never told to take into account the subsequent impacts and consequences of what they're doing, and so they think they're on a good path and doing it because people are paying them money and so on, and you just keep going until your task is complete.
And then you can do it. It's
right.
It was a challenge, and hey, I did it.
Right. And some guy way the hell up that's paying for all of this may be totally ignorant of the situation, or they may want to exacerbate it. Who knows, right? But nonetheless, we actually face that now as a reality for our space industry. Now, maybe it will be as simple as engineering a new kind of an aerogel that will shoot up there and it'll just spread out and suck all the stuff in and eventually
clean up space.
You're right, right. Or maybe we'll develop devices that can catch it. Who knows? But we'll have to intend to deal with it as we go forward on this.
Or a craft that, as it flies, it's got some kind of field around it that would take out anything.
Or even be oblivious to it. See, there's the thing. If we look at the Bob Lazar interview with Joe Rogan, right? In there, he mentions something about these fields not being able to touch this device because of the gravity waves that are coming off of it. If we indeed had that form of transportation, we don't have this issue. This issue only exists because we're putting stuff up there with rockets. If we were putting them up there with spaceships that had their own gravity field, then as that gravity field is encountered by these obstacles, it will just warp it around it, and the thing generating the gravity field would never be destroyed, never be harmed, or whatever. So maybe that will be our solution, that they'll have to roll out all of this technology just to be able to get us back in the repair of the satellite so that AT&T can work and you can get your YouTube, that kind of thing.
So that's the only thing to me that which would tell me, because they are so willy-nilly about blowing things up in space, I would assume they already have that technology and just haven't rolled it out so that people know about it.
Then if you apply that metric, though, then what about the logic of the hydrogen bomb? Why did we explode all of that? Why all the underground testing, polluting all of the underground aquifers and all these kind of things? And what about all of the problems we're living with now, which is nuclear radiation from waste? Why did we even build the nuke plants if we can deal with the waste, right?
Yep.
We did something really dumb there.
Yep.
Not because there was somebody that was going to eventually, now we're going to have to deal with the nuclear waste issues. But we're fortunate, I think, because we're right at that cusp as we go into sci-fi world. We're going to have a compounding effect that is just going to be absolutely staggering. Now, I'm seeing it already in sciences, but this is where I pay attention to it. In consumer devices and so on, we may see it relatively soon as well.
Well, why don't you walk us through what types, like 10 years from now, what are we going to be doing as far as like how do we cook food and how do we take a shower? I mean, is everything going to change and kind of leak into the cryptocurrency side of the future and all that? And
okay, so from a conceptual viewpoint, as a species, it's evolutionarily advantageous to have more than two members of your species that can breed, right? Mm-hmm. If your species was limited, no matter what its size, to only two members that could breed, if one of them dies, your species dies. Okay, so it makes sense for us as a species to understand that we've passed the point at which centralization of anything provides any evolutionary benefits. Now, centralization of food distribution, entertainment, telephony, government, newspaper, toilet paper, centralized distribution, manufacturing distribution, all of these things has an economic advantage. Okay, it's the mass production effect. But at some point, you get to the point where information becomes the currency, so to speak. So if I had a machine that could take in raw wood pulp, and produce toilet paper just because it got instructions on how to do that, then it actually makes sense for me to do that because I've got a source for the raw material here, and I wouldn't have to transport the finished goods. Mm-hmm. So transportation of the finished goods involves having to use quantum computers to route the trucks, for instance, because it's so complex. But you have a degradation of the actual economic value you've gained by the mass production by having to do mass distribution. It's a cost of doing it. So if we can get away from that with distributed systems, which leads us back to cryptocurrencies, then and especially self-logging distributed systems, then such as recreate any part of the node, then you basically have a society that takes on the survival characteristics, the evolutionary characteristics of the hologram, which is that you've got a giant chunk of a holographic plate, and 90% of that holographic plate gets destroyed, but you can recreate the whole thing from the 10% you have left, because it's an evolutionary survival thing, right? And so it may be that 10 years from now, everything is moving into distributed systems, all powered by, or all allowed to exist because of the control systems that we'll be able to engineer with the software. Okay, so
but in that way, and this is the fight I've been having with Dick Allgaier, he believes that the same powers that be that control us now are going to control us in that world. They just won't tell us about it. They'll keep that control. But and my argument is, well, that's not decentralized at all. That's complete centralization, and I just don't see the people and the institutions that have governed us so poorly for so long, after there is some kind of hiccup, being the one that people turn to for, hey, help us out and create the U.S. fiat dollar again.
Okay, see, I don't see it happening that way at all. Okay. I don't think there's going to be a hiccup. I don't think we're going to ever be able to point to a date and time that, this is the big crash.
Like September 11th.
Right, exactly. I don't think that will occur. I think that such markers may be put into our heads so that we'll have an emotional reaction to that, and that's a form of control and manipulation. Okay, and so they can manipulate that way. So I see things much more organic, and things change. And things are changing rapidly now. Species are dying off everywhere. We're in a giant mass extinction kind of a thing. I see no reason to presuppose that the centralized controllers are smart enough to survive the characteristics that are arguing that they're about to become extinct. Okay, I don't think they can think their way out of the problem they're in, because they can't have the sci-fi world and centralized control. It just does not happen. And the distributed systems, as well as the fact that the ability to make the distributed system is pushed further down into the population, right? So, so communism makes no sense. If everybody can be the owner of their own production facility, because you've got a device that sits there and is a, you know,
like a replicator,
a 3D printer of everything that you just have to provide the raw material and software, and it can produce it, then you've proved that communism doesn't matter anymore because you're your own producer. You needn't buy or sell to anybody, you just produce on your own. And that alone is such a huge level of disruption for the retail industry and so on, that we're going to have all of these mega collapses and changes from the corporations as a result of that level of distribution. All of this is, by the way, predicated on further and further refinement of knowledge and the further distribution of that knowledge. And there's no cost these days to the distribution of knowledge. And in fact, it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to distribute knowledge as opposed to goods themselves. So people are now starting to think of various different devices that can be placed out and about that would do the actual production, so that they don't have to muck about with the distribution component of it, because the cost of distribution is harming our society according to the powers that be at the moment. Because what's our primary source of their anxiety over climate? Carbon dioxide. They're 100% wrong. Okay, caveat. Let's stop right here and say that you can go see oceanographers and everybody that's connected with physical sciences that will tell you carbon dioxide is a trailing indicator. It's not a leading indicator. When you see that it's maximally high, you're heading into a cold period. We're there now.
Yeah.
Anyway, though, so distribution, though. So I would see that we would, our big thing at the moment is distribution of the information, and that's why they're really trying for a 5G. So the 5G rollout it means fifth generation, but it's millimeter waves, okay? So if we had 5G that didn't involve millimeter waves, we wouldn't have a lot of the health issues involved and so on. But just to look at the 5G in an abstract, it's going to be so powerful for the distribution of information that there will be real-time feedback, two-way feedback between yourself and any number of computers. And so you would be able to have glasses, for instance, that had cameras in them. The cameras would take pictures of what you're looking at, feed it back to the internet, and you could write software that would apply prices to it, or give you dimensions, or tell you the amount of material, or tell you the carbon footprint, just by swinging your eyes there, and it would come back in real time. That's the level of bandwidth we would get. So we would not have any of these latency issues, or that kind of thing. You'd be able to stream real-time YouTube kind of stuff, capture it, store it continuously, just by turning your glasses on and walking around. It's the promised land in many regards, right? But 5G would enable us to do that, but it would also signal and herald the shift into this ultimate information economy, the way that we're not quite there now. Yes, a lot of people are in an information economy, and we're making progress in converting most of the world to software or something control, which has huge benefits. Okay, our cars last longer, we make fewer mistakes, we're crashing fewer airliners. Less and less human error ever gets into it because we can program a lot of this stuff out. The cars will help us react better. They may blow up on their own because we haven't figured out how to charge them quite right, or you can get something. Really, the reason that all the Teslas blow up mostly has to do, or any of the cars, mostly has to do with the pollution of the lithium. Little tiny spots of non-lithium material within the batteries cause hot spots, and they eventually blow up. But in any event, though, so as we get better and better and better, and the software helps us get better faster exponentially, everything grows, we get into a distributed economy and a distributed world. So we would have our own power plants at the house. We wouldn't have to have bazillions of miles of copper.
And they wouldn't be, would they be based on oil oil
No,
based.
no.
I mean, that is so
so lame. You don't have to bring fuel to some of these things.
But people ask me all the time, well, what will happen if, say, we get free energy type of huge industries? I mean, what are people going to do with their time in a high-tech future? My take is you'll be free to be yourself and do what you want. I would hope.
It's a different world. Okay, so then economy changes. Then the nature of economics change. Okay, because right now we have we're playing if we look at it as a zero-sum game, there's no green technologies whatsoever. So you can't make a computer that's green. Okay,
Right.
The cost of that, the pollution and everything, and it's just horrific. But we can't.
AOC could do it, but no one else.
No one else could. Correct. But even then, there's no green industry.
Right.
Not even mortuaries, right? They're the cost of the pollution of the ground with the formaldehyde from the people and stuff. And if you're going to cremate people, you've got the carbon dioxide and all the other stuff going in the atmosphere. So there's no real green industries that way that's sustainable. If we go this route, though, and we're able to achieve this way, let me back up and state that I'm going to go and do an interview with this guy, and we'll probably show up on Leap Channel or something, but this fellow is a scientist who's recently been to an energy conference, and he saw 2 over Unity devices generated. Over Unity means they make more energy than they consume, which means basically free energy. You may have to prime the pump a little bit, but once you do that, you don't have to worry about it. Well, if we get these kind of devices, then our cost of them, if we're smart, should include also the cost of disassembly and recycling all the material back. We've never taken that into account because our species was so short-lived. Who cared about the trash? You're going to die in 72 years. You don't have to worry about it. The longer we live, though, taking your C60 and so on, the more you're actually going to care about the environment. The more it's better for the environment to get people to be long-lived because they're going to care because they're going to have to live with this crap for a lot longer. But the over Unity devices, we have the cost of the production of them and the cost of the materials in them. Even at some huge amount of cost, it might make sense to do mining of asteroids to get key elements in order to make over Unity devices, right? And at that point, once we're starting to mine, just as an aside, start mining asteroids, we also have the ability at that stage to start living in space, create environments so we can actually take some of the pressure off the planet. But just let's, aside from all of that, 10 years from now, and it'll maybe be only like 9 years or so, okay? Because things are going to happen a lot faster as the combinoric stuff starts becoming exponential, right? So science will look like a Bitcoin chart, as we get into that, because there'll just be so much piling on and so much interaction that you'll get so many. Every time you discover one new material, it'll be able to be applied to so many things that have already existed that you created 50 or 60 other new materials that same day without even thinking about it, and new benefits and so on, including processes. So we'll be able to do things better because pretty soon we'll be doing 3D printing of materials, where instead of making a sheet of aluminum, we might be able to print one molecule layer of aluminum, another of bismuth, another of aluminum, and make our floaty RV things, right? Anyway, though, so getting back to this, 9 years or so from now, so I'm looking at this point, my temporal markers are about 2029. The reason that I pegged that has to do with Apophis.
Are you still running the programs under?
No. I've actually.
Is this based on the last few runs, or?
Based on consolidated data sets, okay? Because I've been looking at that. For reasons that we discussed last night, I've had to look at my own processes in order to be able to explain to these third parties, which we won't go into. And so I was just looking at a lot of this stuff, have been for the past few weeks. And in order to figure out where I went wrong, how the Blue Avians screwed me over, and Gaia and all of these kind of things. And I don't blame Gaia. They were just, for-profit corporation doing what they needed to do. But in any event, though, so I've looked at a lot of this, and I'm just pinging a lot of my thinking to 2029 and then back into 2024. Okay, 2024 is my first hurdle for transition into sci-fi world, which we could go into for another couple of hours. But in any event, these two temporal markers, 2024 and 2029, by 2029, I suspect it won't matter where you live or where you decide to live. You won't need to have wiring for delivery of electricity. You'll be able to carry a little device and set it down, and it'll probably be an over Unity device, and it may cost you a certain amount of money up front. that will include its destruction and recycling, unlike the nuke plants, right? But some of these over Unity devices, by the way, may actually help us get rid of nuclear waste because of some of the ways they work, but that's another discussion. But anyway, so you have a device that you can get all the electricity you want. And the nature of the over Unity device will be such that you've got a 3-bedroom house and decide you're going to move in your other family, or you're going to build a whole other house for your dogs or something, and you'll just plug in more connectors and the device will adapt and just produce that much more electricity up to a certain limit on it. But it'll have that capacity to grow with demand. So it's not like they have to be replaced every 5 years, like your computer or something along these lines. All right, so now we still have a couple of other issues. Food distribution, water distribution will be the two main elements, and then also information distribution. At the moment, we're doing a lot of the carrying of the information through the airwaves in the form of the 4G cell towers and wireless. If we move into 5G, we've got two major problems. So the 5G is going to have huge health issues, but it's also, in my opinion, the way that they've got it structured now, and this is purely my opinion, and I'm sure all kinds of engineers will argue that I'm 100% wrong and should go and stick my head in the sand out here. But it's my opinion that 5G will do to our planet what Tesla's electricity would have done to our planet. So Tesla had these things called the Clif towers that he built. And his idea was to have a generator that would put electricity into the air and through the ground, and so you'd be able to turn on a device, an electrical device out in the field in a farm in Ohio, just by shoving the thing into the ground and connecting it, right? But that would have killed all of our technology because the radiated electricity through the air would have prevented radio from being effective, television never would have worked, we never would have had cell towers or any of that. We would have had to have done something else in order to accomplish those things. So it may have just stymied our society had we gone that route. I think 5G might do that. Because I think 5G, because of the lifespan of all of these various different kinds of businesses, and how long it took us to go from 2G to 3G, and how long to go from 3G to 4G, and the expansion of the cell towers and so on. I think 5G might lock us into a particular situation where there's no possibility for other radiation effects to get through, and that this locks us into a particular kind of a saturated world, if you will. Now, it wouldn't last very long, and I don't think we'll actually ever implement 5G. The reason I think...
Isn't it being implemented now?
In places, spotty. I'm talking about...
It's horrible. Because I get it on my phone, it automatically gets whichever signal it gets. So I get 5G. Every time I'm on 5G, because it's not built out, it's just clogged.
Correct.
It's just... it's useless. I'm like, I don't want it. I want it off my phone, not to mention what it might unknown be doing to my health.
There's the thing. Now, 5G is a cancer causer. We know this from the TSA and from people that used to use 5G, which we should really always refer to it as millimeter bandwidth, okay, millimeter wave size. But what we call 5G has been in laboratories for a long time for use with DNA. RNA, for use with as basically electronic microscopes, okay, where they beam the 5G off and then they translate it in and you can look at things, right? And it's really effective and very handy there because you can look down right to the DNA level. But it destroys the DNA, but it's not very penetrating and it takes a lot of power. So 5G is really this bizarre kind of a thing. We're going to have, some people are going to make an absolute fortune, huge fortune, because they'll have to produce billions of these little wafer devices or little tiny towers to spread throughout cities and countryside and everything. We will be one of the last places in the North American continent to get 5G where I'm at. 5G, by the way, it doesn't travel very far. So they've got to have huge amounts of electricity to get it to go a little tiny distance. And then they got to have a repeater and then another one and so on. So your cities are going to be filled with these repeaters. It's going to have to be everywhere. There's the backscatter effect. It's the backscatter effect that caused the TSA guys.
What's the backscatter effect?
Okay, so with the longer, slower wavelengths that don't peak up as much, when they hit something, they'll bounce and reflect. Okay, if it's a really fast kind of a wave, it shatters, and you get a backscatter effect off of everything that it can't be absorbed. So 5G would be absorbed by this material, but not by this. So we would get the 5G going through us, bouncing off around us, because it doesn't actually go through us. The 5G would be absorbed within 2-3 millimeters maximal in your skin. So it would go through your skin on your head, but it wouldn't get through your skull. Might not even penetrate into the outer 2 or 3 cell layer in your skull. So you'd actually get a backscatter effect off of your bones.
It's crazy.
That's why they used it in TSA. So they could see everything as that soft image around the hard image of the bones, because the bones scattered it back. They're actually scattering the radiation off your bones in order to get the image. And they wonder why this causes cancer, especially in the people that had to operate that stuff. They're getting the backscatter continuously. So it's not very good. But it will allow that level of bandwidth that we could control all of these devices, right? So you'd be able to just walk around anywhere on the planet and hit your 5G phone, and it would connect through all of these different things back to your refrigerator, and you could say, so you're out at the store. Now, did I need milk or not? Ask your refrigerator back at your house. Mm-hmm. Is there milk in there? The refrigerator says, yeah, there's milk, don't worry. Yeah.
Or it doesn't have it, and it'll order it for you, and you just walk over and pick it up.
Correct. So we'll still have distribution issues, but things will change for us over these next 9 years, okay? They'll change most dramatically for large chunks of the population in the United States over the next 4 years, through 2024.
Is that because of the monetary changes, or
they're
social,
or all of it? They're just a minor participation in there. Okay, they're a big part, the monetary, the cryptos, and all of that. There's going to be big amounts of disruption. Our political system is shifting. Our social interconnections are all shifting. Everything's in a state of change. Mm-hmm. Every 15 years, society pretty much changes out everything anyway. But we're in a very intense period of change through 2024 that'll sort of slack off a bit through 2029, and will stabilize a bit.
Hi, Bix Weir, roadtoruta.com, coming to you from northern Washington, where I'm trying to get an interview with Clif High, except the wind is going to whip me out of Washington all the way up to Vancouver. Help! Cliff, where are ya?